So I just can't tell because of at least you're there.
Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm trying to use mic, it's a little bit different. Thank you all for being here. If this is your first Heart Talk, welcome. If it isn't, welcome back. As many of you know, the lodge was finished in 1938, the same year as a log cabin cafe across the street. That doesn't sound very good, does it? A little loud. I'll work on that. Anyway, if the architecture in here was familiar, there's a reason for that. Say there's a log cabin cafe across the street. These talks were started years ago with a few goals in mind, chief of which was to build a sense of community both for those who live here and those who don't. Many of you are summer residents or you pass through in the winter. This is your first time here ever. And a lot of you are never going to get to experience a guided wildlife tour from Kate back there, or story time or a lecture from Jim Halfpenny on Wolverines, or in this case, a talk from Russ Kehler on his book and various photography efforts. So with that, Russ Kehler. About halfway through, we're going to pass the hat. All proceeds will be donated to Yellowstone. Thank you. Testing. We're a little tinny. It was working great a few hours ago. All right, let me see what I can do here. 1, 2, 3.
Still low.
Yeah. Let's try this. 1, 2. It's getting better, isn't it? Yeah. How's this sound? We okay? Well, first of all, I'm so glad to see so many people here. Thank you so much for coming in. Now we have to get the light working. Cam. There we go. I think, yeah. I'm so sorry. We really did come in early to try and get all the bugs straightened out with all this stuff. So I'm Russ Kehler. Thank you very much for coming out here tonight. I'm really happy to see everybody here. It's really, I feel like it's a real honor just to be asked to speak to you and, to have you sit here and listen to me for a little while. Tonight I'm going to be talking about the work that I do in Yellowstone National Park as a professional wildlife photographer and an author. Let me see if I can keep my PowerPoint going here. I've titled my talk this evening, Imagining Yellowstone, which in some ways is a reference to my book, Imagine Yellowstone, Tales and Images from Yellowstone's Northern Range. But in a larger sense, I hope to communicate with you how and why I translate my experiences in the wild into photographs and prose. You may have, some of you, I know my work, some of you have my book already or have seen other of my work, but many of you maybe have not, or at least you think you have not. My stuff ends up being in a lot of different places, and so I'm going to share some of that with you because you may actually have seen some of my work already. Cam, I'm really having trouble with this light. Is it possible to get it any brighter? Okay. All right. There you go. Oh, that's much better. Thank you. So anyway, some of the places you may have seen my work. I know if you're a wildlife guide or if you're just a wolf watcher or a bear watcher, you may subscribe to a website that's Yellowstone Reports. And on the right-hand side, left-hand side from your view, the left-hand side there, you see Laurie Lyman's reports about the daily wildlife activity and so on. What you may not know, because it's just a little tiny print down there, underneath all the photographs on the right-hand side of the page, it says Russ Kehler in little fine print there. So if you follow Yellowstone Reports, then you see my work there. Also, a lot of times there are other authors who don't do photographs, but they're looking for pictures for their books. I'm just going to give you a couple examples. This is Wolf 1047, who's from the Junction Butte Pack, and Rick McIntyre used this in his book, Thinking Like a Wolf. So you may have seen that there. Another example is Leo Leckie, Jim Halfpenny, and Shauna Perrin recently wrote this book about the genealogy of the wolves in the pack going back all the first 30 years. It's a really good book if you can get it. And Jim has those at his place over in Gardner. But the picture on the front cover there of the book is also in this white box right there. That's 907F, who many of you are familiar with. She was the matriarch of the Junction Butte Pack, a very famous wolf. But she was really shy, and she stayed really far away from people. And although a lot of people will have these little digiscope pictures that they get on their phone, very low resolution, high resolution quality photographs of her are very rare. So Jim asked me if I had any, and I actually do have a few. So we put it on the cover, and a few other places inside the book you can see my work as well. So I also post on Facebook and Instagram. Just 2 days ago, we were all watching down at a carcass down in Little America, and a woman said to me, "Oh, you're a photographer. You should look at this Instagram, Facebook, Old Wolf Photography." I said, "Oh, well, okay, yeah, I do actually. It's me." And I run into that a lot, because sometimes people see Old Wolf Photography and they don't make the connection with my name. So anyway, so I do a lot of posting on Facebook and Instagram, and whenever anything controversial comes up, now this particular story right here was from last Christmas when Wolf 1048F, she was killed illegally. She was poached just north of the park on Christmas evening of all times. Anyway, it was a big story, blew up all over the internet. Anytime there's a big story like that, it's also picked up by local news and very often national news. And so you may have seen my photos on national broadcasts or local broadcasts, and sometimes they even ask me for interviews. So that's another place that you might see my work. I also contribute to magazines. This particular article here is from International Wolf Magazine, and this is an article that I wrote recently. It's actually the current issue of International Wolf Magazine, and if you don't subscribe to it, then they don't usually post things online, but I told them I have a lot of followers, and could they please post the story? So they did post this story online. 1479F is another fascinating wolf. She's actually the sister of the wolf that was poached. This wolf was killed legally just outside of Gardner a few months before her sister was. But it's an interesting story about her life, and if you would like to read about that, I can give you the link at the end of the presentation here, and you can go online and take a look at that. Ultimately, I want my work to help, if even in a small way, to preserve and protect the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Because I feel like I have a debt that I owe to the creatures. 100% of all of the profits that I make on everything that I just described to you, and also any profits that I make on photo prints that I sell on my website, 100% of everything that I take in that's profit, I give back to protecting wildlife. Most of that goes to Yellowstone Forever. Some of it goes a few other places. By the way, if you're passing the hat around later tonight, all that's going to go to Yellowstone Forever. I don't hold on to anything. So I'd like to begin this evening by reading one of my stories to give you a little bit of an example of what my wildlife stories are about. And this first story is called The Eagle and the Wolf, and it's got a little bit of a twist to it, and we'll see how long it takes you to catch on and see what's going on here. With all the energy of an angry storm cloud, the fearsome raptor descended from the sky, coursing downward towards its unsuspecting prey. Its wingtips folded tightly behind it, the enormous golden eagle fell toward the earth with increasing speed. Intent on its target, the eagle's copper-colored eyes locked tightly on the unaware creature, looking calmly along the dust-laden trail below. Just as it was about to make contact, the eagle's wings suddenly burst wide open, creating a loud rustling noise, like fresh laundry flapping in a summer storm. Confused and startled by the loud noise, I ducked and looked over my right shoulder, just as the golden passed a few feet overhead. That was the first clue I had that I was in danger. It seems unlikely the eagle intended to make full contact, and the bird pulled up at the last moment before disappearing into a nearby bowl. Still, realizing what it feels like to be the unwitting prey of such a fearsome predator is an experience I never wish to repeat. A bit undone by my close call, I could see the eagle rise from the depression and fly west over the creek. I wondered what had made the raptor take off just moments after landing. That's when I spotted a gray wolf nearby. Apparently, the golden had been frightened from the bowl by a 13-month-old wolf from the Junction Butte pack. It had appeared at the far edge of the depression. Why they were both there was unclear, as no carcass was anywhere in the area. The yearling wolf quickly slipped through the conifer trees that lined the creek bank and disappeared into the tall willows, leaving me standing alone in amazement. After the unusual course of events, I considered calling it a day. Perhaps I'd be pressing my luck to look for more adventure than I'd already experienced. But having traveled only a couple miles, I decided I'd climb further up the mountain trail, anticipating an uneventful end to my hike. Steep climb in the thin Wyoming air pressed hard on my lungs as I ascended, and thirst began to get the better of me. So I stopped about 40 minutes later to find my wind and refreshed with a long drink of cool water on a weathered old spruce log. Looking a good distance down the trail, I saw the gray yearling appear again. Following the same path I had just used, it was still dripping wet from visiting the creek, even after its long trot up the mountain. Having simultaneously spotted me on the log, it immediately froze in its tracks. Considering its options, the surprised young wolf looked to its left and to its right, and finally decided to skirt around me by climbing to the northwest. Not wanting to disturb the wolf, I sat still on my log while the youngster made his way diagonally up the hillside through the maze of fallen timbers. The yearling paused on a jagged gray boulder, and a loud raven flew towards the wolf, drawing its attention upwards, which was just what I needed to capture the perfect image. So if you look in the pictures here, you can see the photograph on the left is the wolf going through the timbers, and then on the right, and I'm guessing that the raven was doing alarm calls, and I don't really know if the raven was doing alarm calls because of me being there, or because of the wolf being there, or for both of us. But you can see I call that the Rin Tin Tin pose on the right there. Some of you are old enough here to know what I'm talking about. And if you're not, you can Google that. Over the years, I've had a lot of very exciting experiences in Yellowstone. And I'm sure looking around the room here, I'm sure many of you have also had exciting experiences in the backcountry. And one of the reasons that I write is to share my experiences with folks like you who understand how special and wild the creatures are in Yellowstone. You know, when I run into one of you in the park or here in Silvergate and you share a story with me about something that's happened to you in the wild, I always get a smile on my face, and I enjoy living vicariously through your story. And I'm also remembering, you know, moments when I've had similar experiences. And in the same way, when I write stories in my book or my magazine articles or whatever, I always hope that you'll share the excitement and relate to those experiences yourself. Perhaps while I was reading The Eagle and the Wolf, some of you may have had some experiences in the backcountry with wolves as well, and maybe you were thinking about that. You know, if you've ever stood alone with a wolf miles away from any paved road and looked into their eyes, you know there's something primeval that transpires between you, something that our ancestors understood, but we in our modern society have forgotten. In that moment, you realize you're no longer at the top of the food chain. You're just one predator among many. And in that moment, your exact position in that hierarchy is a little vague. And yet wolves are typically, you know, they're shy, they avoid contact. So you may be in a state of a little bit of raised alert, but something unsaid passes between you. And I've been fortunate over the years to have a number of these wonderful wild wolf experiences, and I enjoy sharing them with my followers and with my readers. You know, you see people who come in and they're visitors and they go through, and I'm sure you've seen this, and they go through the park and they drive through and they stop every once in a while, usually in the middle of the road, when there's a bison bull 40 feet off to the side. But you know, they'll stop at the pullouts and they make it out of their car and walk 10 or 12 feet back to their car. And I run into them in the park and they look at me and they say, "Oh, Yellowstone's just a big drive-through zoo." And I tell them, you know what? After giving them the appropriate safety lecture, I tell them that, you know, get out of your car and hike into the backcountry, 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. And you'll experience a Yellowstone that's completely different from what you see driving down the road and sitting in the safety of your car. For new visitors to the park, or even those who've never visited, I hope that my writing will help them to experience vicariously some of the wild creatures and adventures that I've had. You know, after my book was published by Quiet Country Press, I was actually really surprised to find out that I started getting letters and emails and other kinds of messages from people who have illnesses or injuries or other challenges. And they confirmed that reading my stories and looking at my photos have provided them with an escape from their concerns. And that really means a lot to me. And I'm often inspired myself when I'm watching animals in the park that are clearly injured or facing challenges or in danger, but they continue to press forward, and it just amazes me that it just seems like they don't even notice sometimes. And when I write about these creatures, I hope to inspire others as well. This next story is about a creature that inspired me a great deal. And I title it The Warrior, and he's a creature that you might not necessarily think of as a warrior, but I hope I change your mind. I'm always pleased when I find elk remaining in the hills surrounding Lamar Valley during the frigid months of winter. Most elk leave this area in autumn and move north towards Mammoth Hot Springs, with some even traveling outside the park to the lower elevations north of Gardner, Montana. The great advantage that the migrating elk have is that these areas provide some protection from the harshest cold. And with less snow, there's much more forage. The disadvantage is once they're outside the park boundary, the elk are subject to hunting in Montana. Still, a fair number of elk, particularly the bachelor bulls, remain in the higher elevations around Lamar. Though hunting's not a concern, daily dangers remain. I was scoping north of the Buffalo Ranch in Lamar on a cold winter afternoon, watching a small group of wolves as they weaved their way uphill through the snow. Before long, the wolves slipped behind a rocky rise surrounded by dense trees. I repositioned my scope to look further up the hillside, searching gaps in the trees. Unable to locate the wolves, I spotted a pair of elk bulls. Rushing eastward, in and out of the trees, they bounded through the deep snow until they arrived at a rocky ledge. They quickly turned to face the forest, where 5 wolves suddenly reappeared. The excited wolves created an arc in front of the elk, eliminating any escape route, save that of the steep cliff behind the bulls. A young gray wolf lunged forward, nipping at one of the elk, which lowered its massive rack and swung its sharp antlers, sending the youngster into a roll through the white powder. The second elk took advantage of the confusion to disappear quickly into the spruce. But the wolves remained with the first bull, darting forward and back, trying repeatedly to subdue the fierce elk. The strong soldier stood his ground, heels against the cliff's edge, and refused to give way. As they will often do, the wolves finally laid down in the snow and waited, leaving the tired elk to stand alert while they rested. From time to time, 1 or 2 of the wolves would jump to their feet and dart once again at the lonely elk. His brave stand impressed me as he guarded his cliffside fortress. He could have easily panicked and tried to rush past the hungry wolves. Perhaps he knew somehow that running was just what they had hoped he would do, so they could bring him down from behind. Honestly, after a few hours, I assumed it was a lost cause. But as the short winter's day drew to a close, the wolves finally disappeared again into the trees. The elk remained on the cliff, secure with his back to the precipice. Even after his pursuers departed, he looked proud as he stood alone on top of that snow-covered hillside, victorious at last. You know, many of us here can think of wolves that we've known in the park who suffer from various injuries like dislocated hips or broken legs, broken jaws, and yet they still went out every day and hunted to provide for the puppies at the den. For many years, we had a grizzly bear in the park named Scarface because he had been in so many battles. And I just saw a picture 2 days ago. Somebody else took it. I haven't seen this bear yet, but apparently the poor thing was really, its nose had been seriously damaged. And we've also had a coyote. You know, I haven't seen it this year, but I started photographing it about 4 or 5 years ago. And his name is Limpy, or his or her, or some people call it tripod. And when I have to admit, the first time I saw it, because it's only got 3 legs, the first time I saw it, I photographed it and I thought, well, I'm going to document this because I'm never going to see this coyote again. It's going to starve to death soon. And then the next spring it was there. And then the following winter it was there. For like 4 or 5 years, Limpy or Tripod, this coyote's been there year after year after year. And I've actually seen it catching rodents in Lamar. Absolutely amazing. And the older I get, the more I get inspired by nature. And this inspires me not just to write about it and to photograph them, but to actually have empathy for them. Now, I understand there's danger in anthropomorphizing, and the scientists among us can sometimes get a little bit tense when I talk about wildlife. But it is, I believe, a sign of higher intelligence in humans when we can empathize with other creatures. How can we expect people who've never seen wild animals as they struggle to survive to understand the difficulties that these animals face every day? If we want folks to encourage their politicians to support things like the Endangered Species Act or to keep our wild places free from development, then they need to actually feel empathy for these animals. This is another reason that I write and I do my photographs. To feel empathy is to understand the ache a bison cow feels. And I imagine everybody in this room has probably seen this. This time of year, the cow is crossing the Lamar River, and it's swelled from the snow melt, and the currents are deep and running fast, and the calf tries to make it across. And you see it starting to float down the river. And you think what must be going through the mind of that mother watching its calf floating down. That's empathy. Or perhaps to identify with a coyote standing alone and hungry on a cold, wind-swept hillside. This next story is about a coyote, and I was all alone that day, and it was just me and the coyote. And I really felt empathy for this animal, and I'm going to, it's called, as you see, Alone on a Hill. The bitter wind rejoiced while mocking the bright sun as it hung low over the snow-covered mountains to the west, struggling to comfort the Arctic landscape with what little time it had left before it journeyed down behind the icy peaks. The broad, wintry dale, teeming with life during the verdant summer months, on this day, looked more like a tired, empty, abandoned land, save for the brown sage, willows, and tufts of dry grass. I scoped the expanse of Lamar Valley, searching for a sign of wildlife, but alas, wiser than I, it appeared as if the wild things had taken to ground, nestled warmly in dens and under fallen cottonwoods by the river. Fingertips aching with frost nip, I packed my spotting scope, tripod, and camera and made my way east to Soda Butte Valley. The late afternoon sun cast long winter shadows across the snow-frosted landscape. Seeing mysterious paw prints crossing through the willows, I was reminded of games of hide and seek in the woods from my childhood. We would follow each other's footprints through the snow and suss out our quarry. I traced the trail with my scope further to the east until the prints led to a rise in the snow. The thick white drifts rolled down the frozen creek below like icing on a grand white wedding cake. At the crest, the groom stood motionless to the setting sun and his cold face to the unforgiving wind. The coyote song is more of a tenor when compared to the wolf's deep, soulful, sonorous baritone. Still, in the quiet of the waning day, he managed to set a doleful tune. I felt we made a pair, standing together in the solitude of that short winter's day, just as the sun was about to abandon us. I too was alone on a snowbank, gazing down at this coyote. My frosted breath embraced the long lens of my camera, and like the winter breeze freezes the dew upon the sage, I pushed the shutter to freeze the image of the lonesome coyote. You know, most people who write about Yellowstone do so from a perspective of biology, ecology, geology, and the research that they do is invaluable in helping us to understand Yellowstone. It's really important work, and I wouldn't take anything away from it at all. I depend on it as you do. But my education is in the social sciences and psychology. And once you understand that, it begins to help you understand why I write differently about Yellowstone than most other authors do. You might say, I see Yellowstone through a different lens. I'm constantly being introspective about my own inner space when I'm doing photography. And I'm also trying to put myself in the place of the creatures that I photograph when I write. So as you read my work and you see an image like the previous coyote, you'll not only learn about my subjective experience, like my freezing fingertips, but you'll also read about my effort to place myself in the mind of the creature that I'm photographing, to see things through their eyes, and maybe even hypothesize about what they think or feel. If I can get my readers to do likewise, then empathy for these animals is the next logical step. And it's much harder to vote to destroy the habitat of creatures for which you have empathy. The next story I'm going to read you in just a minute was taken in the heat of summer instead of in the cold of winter. And once again, I'm going to tell you about my subjective experience in the heat, but very quickly I'll transfer, I try to get you to identify with me, and then I'm going to transfer that to identifying with this adorable little creature. Maybe my reader can't, all on their own, feel any particular reason why it's important to do anything about global warming. But if I can help them first to relate to an adorable little creature and start to feel empathy for it and understand how global warming is affecting that animal, maybe I can have some kind of an effect. This next story is called Surviving in a Desert of Scree. Scree is that, as you drive through Yellowstone, you see those hillsides that have, looks like piles of rocks coming down. Looks like somebody dumped it from a dump truck. That's Scree. The talus slope, a fragmented gravestone, swept up quickly from the edge of the tree line, giving the appearance of tailings from a vast mining operation. Here and there, tiny green wildflowers struggled to survive in this mountainous desert of Scree. Those were the exception. Since the rocky hillside did not appear to easily tolerate life, at least not to the casual observer. I'd been waiting in the pines near the bottom of the rock for over an hour on this warm July morning. The overhanging boughs provided some relief from the relentless sun that baked the iron-like stones just a few feet in front of me. Reaching for a small atomizer, I misted cinnamon leaf and citronella oils on my exposed skin to fend off the hungry mosquitoes. Eventually, I repositioned my tripod further around the far side of the hill, hoping to have better luck finding my subject and maybe even losing some of the insects. The small stand of young aspen provided shelter from the sun, and a gentle breeze finally kept the mosquitoes at bay. Up and down the scree, I scanned through my long lens, but there was no sign of life. Then, pulling my face from the eyepiece, I caught a glimpse of something from the corner of my eye as it flashed across the rocky hillside. By the time I turned my head, it disappeared. Minutes passed before I saw it again. But as I turned my lens in its direction, it scurried once more under the rocks. Fortunately, I saw exactly where the tiny pike had disappeared this time. Pressing my face firmly against the back of the camera, I focused my lens on the rock and I checked my settings in the eyepiece. The warm sun was pressing down, causing sweat from my brow to drip across my face. I dared not lift my hand from the shutter or wipe away the moisture. I just watched through the eyepiece and waited. Then the tawny brown pike appeared at the pinnacle of a jagged rock, and I immediately squeezed the shutter. Seconds later, the small cold weather mammal disappeared again beneath the rocks, seeking a cool shelter. Pikes are adapted to cold temperatures, with an active metabolism that keeps their body temperature about 104 degrees. So during winter, they don't need to hibernate. They use the deep snowfall to provide a blanket of insulation from the coldest temperatures. And moving through tunnels of snow, they survive the harsh winter by feeding on hay piles of vegetation they prepare during the growing season. Unfortunately, their cold weather metabolism can make it difficult when summer temperatures rise above just 78 degrees. Because of this sensitivity, American pikes could become the first Yellowstone mammal to disappear due to global warming. I'm grateful we still have them in the wild. Let's hope our children will be able to do so long into the future. You know, I may not be able, as some folks are, to do an ecological study to convince society about the importance of protecting our wild places, but I hope through my writing and through my photographs, I might be able to have just a small impact on society's emotional and psychological mindset to predispose people to find ways to protect wildlife. If I may, I'd like to just do a little sidebar now to help you understand why did all this become so important to me. This is a little bit about my background. I grew up on the East Coast about an hour west of Philadelphia. And in those days, the community consisted mostly of some post-war, some very small post-war developments. Mostly we were surrounded by big farms. And in those days, you know, the creeks and woodlands were a place where little boys could capture tadpoles and crayfish and snakes and turtles and frogs, all kinds of wildlife, right outside my back door. And at the age of 8, I saved up my Christmas money and my birthday money, and I went to the grocery store and I bought a little box camera. I think a lot of you know what I'm talking about. And it used film. And the film came in rolls of 12 or 24. I could only afford the 12 roll. That's all I had left with my birthday money. But I took the little box camera, put my 12 rolls of film in there, and immediately went down into the woods. And the first thing I did, my very first camera, the first thing I did was I looked up into the sky and I saw these green maple leaves. And I could see the light coming through the leaves. And it made the green leaves look translucent. And little sparkles of light were coming, shooting between the leaves. So I took my camera and I tried to capture that as best I could. I had no idea who Ansel Adams was, but I guess I was trying to channel him somehow, you know? And then I followed the sunbeams down to the creek. And the water was sparkling from the sunbeams, and it was rippling over the stones and rocks and logs. And I started taking pictures of that. I was 8 years old. You know, I didn't know what I was doing. So I took 15 minutes. I used my 12 pictures, took it to the drugstore. And if you're younger, that's what you had to do. You took it to the drugstore, and then you sat around and waited for a week. And then you went back to the drugstore, and you picked up your pictures, and when I opened them, I was like, wow, this is great. These are awesome. My father came over and said, oh, let me see your pictures. And he looked at me and said, what are these pictures of? I said, look at these leaves. Can you see the light coming through? And he had no concept of what I was trying to do. And he told me he was disappointed that I wasn't taking pictures of the family. Well, I was very hard-headed, and I persisted. And by the time I got into college, um, I was studying psychology, getting my degree in sociology and anthropology and so on. And while I was there, I needed to pay my way through college. So I got a job at the university being the campus photographer. And I was really fortunate because not only did I have to go do all the official functions, like the Christmas party with the president of the college and all those kinds of things, but my boss was really very encouraging, and she encouraged me to go out around the campus. And we had a beautiful campus. There were ponds and beautiful trees, and we had a lot of wildlife going through the campus. It looked like a park, to be honest with you. And she encouraged me to go around and take all kinds of photos because they like to use those in the catalog to try and get people to want to come to the college. So I got a lot of experience taking pictures of, swans and geese and chipmunks and the trees and the ponds and so on. And best of all, remember how expensive it was back then to develop film. And I had free access to my own darkroom with all the chemicals that I needed, and all the printing paper and everything else. And I learned so much about processing photos. And that sort of gave me a good foundation for what I was doing later. I graduated in May, and I almost immediately, it was about a week after I graduated, I threw a tent in the back of my little car, and I drove from Pennsylvania to Yellowstone. It was my big dream, and it changed my life. It was 1980. Now, in 1980, I slept in a little tent, and I climbed Mount Washburn. And if any of you have gone over that pass, and you see people in the parking lot there, in the month of May, the parking lot is completely packed, and there's people lining the street with their cars parked half on the street, half on the road, and you can't even get a spot. And then there's like these lines going up, of people going up to Mount Washburn. The day I went up, I was the only car, and I was the only person on the trail, because that was 1980. I think there were 3 other people in the park and maybe 1 park ranger. It was much different than it is now. But it did change my life, and it was a really great experience for me. I saw bears and bison for the first time. I'm sure it had the same effect on you when you can't make your first visit. And after, I knew I was gonna have to come back, and I continued to visit periodically. But once the wolves were reintroduced, my passion for Yellowstone really took off. And I started flying in from the East Coast 4, 5, sometimes 6 times a year, photographing all the wildlife in Yellowstone. But capturing images of the wolves became my obsession because they were so difficult to photograph, and I was also fascinated with them. And eventually, I bought a cabin here in Silvergate. I'm right down the street. And so I spend as much time here in the park photographing as I possibly can. And over the years, I developed what I would call my philosophy of wildlife photography. And I'd like to share that with you if I could, because it helps to make my experience in the park better. And I hope that, you may already feel this way yourself, but I hope if I share this with you a little bit, it might make your experience when you go into the park a little bit more enjoyable as well. I know we have at least a few wildlife guides in here. You may want to listen to some of this. If you don't already tell your guests this stuff, you might want to. So, a philosophy of wildlife photography, it has to be based to a large degree on my philosophy of life in general. The Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, likes to use the phrase wei wu wei. Now, people, I won't get bogged down on all the different translations and so on, but people have called this, originally it was non-action, and people thought, oh, you shouldn't do anything. But that wasn't really what he meant. What he was trying to say is act without acting, or more, what I think is more precise, is avoid forcing action. I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. When I was much younger, I was a river guide, and I would help people work their way down the river, whitewater rafting and that kind of thing. And as we were going down the river, I would try to guide them so that they wouldn't go into the shallows where there were lots of stones and stuff, and they get snagged up there, because that meant I had to get out of my kayak and bounce them and try and get them back into the deep water. And I would try to keep them from dropping into a big double hydraulic and have the raft flip over, because that meant I had to then get my throw rope and start dragging people out of the water. And I would try to get them to follow the easiest course through the river, the course that was going to make their day more enjoyable and more relaxed. And I think that that's a lot like life. If you're fighting against things and you're struggling and you're not really just letting life take you where it will, you need a little guidance here and there, but if you're struggling all the time against it, it can be a real problem for you. When I was in Africa years ago, I hired a Maasai warrior to be my guide. And the very first morning before we went out, he sat me down and he said, listen, I want you to forget all your expectations right now. Forget everything. He said, we might see lions, we might see giraffe. I can take you to the places where the lions like to hunt. I can take you to the places where the giraffe like to browse. But these are wild creatures. And, we don't know if they're going to be there or not. We might find a lion. If we do, we'll be surprised. We're really happy and enjoy it. But we also need to be happy and enjoy our day if we find wildebeest. Now, if you haven't been to East Africa, basically, think of the wildebeest as the bison in Yellowstone. So what he was saying was, all you see on a given day, and those of you who are wildlife guides know what I'm talking about, if all you see on that day are animals like bison and pronghorn, hey, you know what? Where else in the world are you going to see bison and pronghorn? And they're pretty neat animals. They almost went extinct. And right now they're in the middle of the rut. There's a lot to see there and to enjoy. So in many ways, this simple wildlife guide, who, by the way, grew up in a mud hut, he understood a lot more about finding balance in life than many of us do in Western culture. And I've spent decades in Yellowstone, because I like doing photography, trying the best I can to understand the behavior patterns of wildlife. But every day, when I climb into my Jeep in the morning, in the dark, before I drive into Yellowstone, what I try to remind myself is what Salembo told me: forget your expectations. And it helps me to stay more balanced. There are days where I was really upset with myself because, I don't know, I overslept, or it took me too long to get ready or whatever. And I drove into the park, and you know what? I had a beautiful wildlife sighting of wolves or foxes or whatever, and I got some fantastic photos. And if I had left on time, I would never have gotten those pictures. Well, as with the river, I try to enjoy each day and enjoy the flow as we go through it. I often remind myself that when I'm having a slow day, I try to remind myself that a slow day in Yellowstone is probably better than a good day almost anywhere on earth. I'm going to take this non-action or this non-force philosophy one step further. We often have concerns, both minor and sometimes very serious, pertaining to visitors who just don't respect our wildlife. When I have a photo opportunity, I always try my best to allow the animal to continue its natural behavior without my presence interfering in a detrimental way in its efforts to survive. In other words, I try not to force the animal to become the subject of my photograph. It goes without saying that allowing animals the appropriate distance is not just ethical, but in Yellowstone, it's the law. And if the animal starts to walk away, I try to allow it to have its escape route, remain free and clear, even if that means I have to step back out of the way and miss a really great photograph. And you know what? I miss a lot of wonderful photographs for that reason. And I'm okay with that. Because the animals have to come first. Many visitors don't realize that they're intruding on wildlife here in Yellowstone when they chase them through the sage with a cell phone trying to get pictures of them. And what really gets my goat, and this is as a professional wildlife photographer, what really bothers me is there are people who have large lenses. Some of them almost, or maybe even as large as the lenses that I use. And they go chasing through those sage after the animals. And I think to myself, why did you just spend $20,000 on a lens? And now you're chasing the animal through the sage, you know? And it's particularly frustrating for me because it gives professional photographers a bad name. The animals have to always come first. And you'll see this as a recurring theme in my writing. I strive to be part of the ecosystem as much as I can, rather than being a force to damage it. The struggle to survive is very real for these animals every day, all day long. So while I'm enjoying capturing images of these creatures, they're just working to stay alive. And I should not be making that process more difficult and thereby risking their survival. You know, even when I get a really great picture, I think this fox is a really great picture, I really like this a lot. I took this picture right down the road here a little bit. And by the way, this has a wonderful story behind it. And if you get the book, you can read about it. But even when I have a wonderful photograph like this, you know, I very often, there's a whole lot of things going on that are not captured in that image. And I want to tell people about it. You know, most wildlife photographers, you look through their book, and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way. You know, most wildlife photographers, you look through their books, and you see the picture, and it says, you know, here's a red fox, and I photographed this at 6 a.m. on Thursday. And they might tell you where they photographed it, and you usually won't get a whole lot of other details than that. And then, again, there's nothing wrong with that, but because I'm a writer, I try to present a whole lot more. So if you look at one of my photos, you'll typically learn about the surrounding environment, other animals that were there perhaps, how I felt physically or emotionally, and maybe how I interpret or, you know, what I think maybe the animal is thinking or feeling. I try to paint a picture with my words so that even if you didn't see my photograph, you can still see my photograph in your mind. I want you to keep that in mind as I do my next story. This one's called The Battleground. As dawn slowly awakened the lush Lamar Valley, a chill in the air reminded me that autumn was drawing near. Like a guest arriving too early to the party, I was not quite ready for her bluster. August, however, had not yet run its course, and the last major ritual of summer now enveloped every corner of the northern range. The air warmed, and shadowy wisps of fog that followed the Lamar River soon disappeared into the morning air. Like a scene from centuries past, the ritual began as the bison filled Lamar Valley as far as the eye could see. Tall clouds of dust rose here and there from the valley floor, filling the air with a brown haze, as if small campfires of green pine boughs had suddenly been set ablaze. The bison bulls were to blame for the dust storms, which would continue until dark. The huge animals create wallows on the dry valley floor, and then, after covering the dust with their scent, they roll furiously from side to side as if their lives depended on being immersed in the pungent fragrance. Growls, grunts, and grumbles could be heard coming from all directions. The bulls were now in full rut, and their voices made clear their intentions. Not that the cows needed any reminder, as many of them raced here and there, trying desperately to evade their pursuers. But the bulls had their blood up, And once they decided on a particular cow, it was as if someone had bound the two together with iron chains, never to leave her side, until the act was complete. Other bulls, covered in brown dust, rose from the wallows and marched over the tall August lawns to claim their title on the battleground of honor, posturing and growling with their deep bass voices were often enough to frighten off a young, inexperienced bull. A sudden burst of thunderous speed would at times cause a wise bull to give ground. But far too often, the warriors met, each pressing 2,000 pounds of muscle, bone, and sinew firmly against one another. And still, it was just not enough. Soon their massive heads, armed with sharp horns, would pound from side to side, twisting violently in an attempt to inflict a mortal wound. But this is never a sparring event, but truly a battle for the survival of whose genes will be passed to the next generations. Amidst all this harrowing drama, the clowns arrived. It was clear that the children had no idea what was happening around them. But like harlequins trying to assist the lion tamer, the calves raced in and out dangerously, attempting to join the excitement, not quite knowing what to do. A few of the tiny youngsters even butted their small heads together or climbed on each other's backs. Fortunately, none of the calves were injured, but the same could not be said for the bulls. Many will live on to sire new generations of calves, while others will not be so fortunate. And after the season cycle once again, as they have since the ages of ice, so will the annual ritual, assuring the herds remain strong. Well, what about those wolves? I'm almost done here. I just have a couple more things I want to go over with you here. What about those wolves I told you I love to photograph so much? They really are my obsession, as they are for many of you. And you know, so many books are already written just about wolves. So when I did my book, I thought, well, I think maybe I'd rather do something about all the wildlife in Yellowstone. But be assured, there's a lot of wolf stories and a lot of photos here. So the first one I'm just going to do two quick stories. They're both pretty short. And what I'm trying to show here in this next story is that the aspects of wild places that we were taught to fear the most are actually the very essence of those places. This story is called Fire and the Wolf. Autumn in Yellowstone sometimes seems more like winter than anything else. But just when you get accustomed to the recurring snow showers and chilly winds, it suddenly warms up into the 40s. The wind subsides and your frozen bones begin to thaw as the summer lupine is about to bloom, as if the summer lupine is about to bloom again. On just such an afternoon in early November, I found myself traveling west to Elk Creek. I climbed the gravel trail that cut a gentle incline through the steep hillside with sage and pine, and as I reached a bend in the path, I paused to look over the rolling hills to the east. Many years earlier, fire had swept through these hills, releasing the captive seeds that were sealed in thousands of pine cones that littered the forest floor. The ground had been swept clean, save but for the lonely gray and black trunks of the once forgotten conifer forest. But thanks to the fire, the freed seeds burst from their activity, and decades later, the hills had the look of a forest in its adolescence. The young conifer trees were full and green with new growth and the promise of youth, though not quite as tall as the still standing skeletons of their ancestors. On the opposite hillside, I spotted movement in the old burnt and fallen pines. A handsome gray wolf from the Wapiti Lake pack had emerged from behind the scarred deadfall. Without my tripod, I squatted in the tall autumn grasses and struggled to balance the lens before squeezing the shutter. I could not help but think how misunderstood nature can be. Man so often fears both fire and the wolf, but they, each in their own way, have brought Yellowstone back into balance. So I have one more story to do real quickly. Many of you have, I'm sure, watched wolves in the park, gotten to know them, and then they get taken away from us because they die from interspecies killing or illness, sometimes hunting. Hunting seems to be the one that affects folks emotionally the most. And when I post, sometimes I'll post memory photos like of wolves from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or whatever, and tell their story as, when I'm doing an Instagram post or something, not just the stuff that's happening today. And when I do that, I know a lot of times people who knew those wolves, they want to mourn. But I really feel like we had a really good connection with these creatures, and they meant so much to us, and I want to celebrate their lives. I know that when I pass away, I want my children to celebrate my life. I don't want them to just sit around and be sad all the time. So I hope you'll keep that in mind as I read the last story here. It's called The Legend, and it's about one of those wolves from many years ago. By December 2012, many of the elk and deer had migrated southeast out of the park for winter in search of lower elevations and access to forage. The wolves followed as they always do. Standing alone in a quiet, snowy meadow, looking to feed her family, a gray alpha wolf was taken down by a Wyoming hunter as she searched for mule deer. Unfortunately, the scenario is not unusual, and many Yellowstone wolves meet the same fate. What was remarkable is that this wolf was an international media star, adored by hundreds of thousands of wildlife watchers worldwide. Of course, I mean the 06 female, also known as 832F. It's easy to get lost in mourning and frustrated with the politics of wildlife management, but I like to remember that every creature living in the northern range has a life worth celebrating. Every plant and animal within the fragile ecosystem plays an essential role in maintaining balance, including predators of all shapes and sizes, just like prey animals like elk and deer are important. Bears, cougars, wolves, coyotes, foxes, eagles, badgers, and pine martens also play a critical role. Earlier that same year, on a warm sunny afternoon in May, I watched as 06 trotted downhill, leaving the den and heading towards Soda Butte Creek. The rest of her Lamar Canyon pack had already fed on an elk carcass throughout the day. Finally, with her daughters Middle Gray and 776 babysitting her 5-week-old puppies at the den, she was relieved of duty and able to get something to eat herself. But duty was never really seemed to leave her mind, ever. She walked downstream to the carcass, and after taking just a couple of bites, she picked up a large piece of food and immediately returned uphill to share it with the pups. A few minutes passed, and down the hill she trotted again, looking for another shipment to carry to her little ones. I could see from her belly that she was still nursing, but was now introducing them to solid food. As she stood in the water, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm surprised I didn't mess more of these up. As she stood, this is 06. As she stood in the water, she understandably looked a bit weary. The continued burden of providing for a family of 11 bore heavily on the 6-year-old wolf, and particularly while caring for her newborn pups. Many of us began to rethink the old stereotypes of what it meant to be an alpha during her brief life. She taught her mate, 755, and the rest of her family how to hunt and thrive in the dangerous and challenging world with which wolves contend. There were times when she would bring down an elk, several times her size, all by herself. And then her family would gather around to eat. She selflessly cared for her pack and taught them by example. In many ways, her leadership was an example for us all. Certainly, this is a life worth celebrating. So this is how I try to give back. I want my writing and my photos to lift up those who love wildlife. I want to expose those who've never had the opportunity to leave their homes, to experience Yellowstone in some way, and maybe even change some people's minds about why all of this is so important. So I'm trying to do this a little bit to try and help. But there's also no reason why you can't do a lot of the same stuff. You know, you can donate to groups like Yellowstone Forever or other organizations that try to protect wildlife. Sorry, I'm losing my place here. You can post your own stories on Facebook and Instagram, social media, talking about and pictures of wildlife. They don't have to be professional pictures like mine. And just tell people about how wonderful you think these animals are. And talk to your friends and family. I mean, you know, my work is clearly not going to tip the scales and fix everything that needs to be done. But if history has taught us anything about environmental activism, it's that our voices together really can, in the long term, make a difference. You've been very patient listening to me tonight. I hope you've enjoyed my photographs. I'm going to hang around for a few minutes, answer your questions if you have any, and then I'm going to be sitting at that table over there. I have some books over there that I can autograph for you. And again, all profits go to Yellowstone Forever. But I really want to thank you. You've been a very nice audience. I hope you enjoyed this. I had a great time sharing my stories with you. So do we have any questions? All right, thank you very much. Very kind of you. Thank you. By the way, if you're interested in seeing that story about 1479 that's online with the International Wolf Magazine, that's on my website, which is oldwolfphoto.com. And I don't know if you can read it. It's on the bottom line there on the screen, oldwolfphoto.com. Also, there are business cards over there by the books. You can grab one of those if you want. That also has the website on there. Any questions? We good? Great. All right. Thank you very much. All right, have a good evening.
Thank you all so much for being here. We just have a few last-minute housekeeping things to do. Next week's speaker is going to be Evan Stout. He's a wildlife guide in the park. He's also a grizzly coexistence advocate. If any of you need a bear-proof trash can, let me know, let Evan know, and we'll make sure we get that to you. As a lot of you know, this space is not normally an event space. If when you stand up, you could help put the folding chairs in this corner and help us move the little wooden tables to the middle and put the little wooden chairs around them. That would be great. Thank you.
I need 1 minute.
Okay.
Marcia,
You do it.
good. Oh, there we go. I'll walk out with you.
But now I'm bummed because Ernest is healing.
We'll see you. Can we come here to? See something different.
Game is getting out very good. Thank you for the love you used to be. That was so helpful. And then, yeah, I will turn to the land accommodate. It's, you know, I mean, if he's been, it's a strong thing. So we all figure out something. It's all good. And we'll try to figure it out. If we got them, so, okay.
Yes, yes.
We'll be there. Okay, sounds good. Well, I decided I need to get this guy. It seems like he's got some. I mean, and the fact that he does the stories is he's and I didn't even know about it.
Yeah, she's okay now. Oh, that goes for those on the front. Okay. Credit card. Bring it back here and I'll sign. Yeah. Thank you. So, yeah, we gave me a bunch of teachers. Boy, you guys are generous. So I'm in Northeast. Okay, where are you from? Oh, okay, very good. Oh, all right, very good. I still have So I'm going to ask you to write